The wind howled across the frozen wasteland of Kepler 442b like a living thing, carrying ice crystals sharp enough to cut through standard atmospheric suits. Marcus Chen pulled his modified thermal gear tighter around his shoulders as he worked beneath the massive hauler transport. The blue-white glow of his plasma torch cast dancing shadows across the permafrost that had become his workshop floor. 3 years he'd been stuck on this ice ball of a planet, ever since the mining consortium decided his humanitarian concerns made him unsuitable for corporate advancement. They'd shipped him to the most remote maintenance depot they could find, expecting him to quit within months. Instead, Marcus had turned the abandoned station into something resembling home. The garage bay doors were reinforced against the constant storms, and he'd rigged a heating system that actually worked most of the time. The transport's main drive coupling had cracked again. These corporate haulers weren't built for the extreme temperature fluctuations of Kepler 442b, but the mining operations demanded they keep running regardless of conditions. Marcus had become something of an expert at keeping impossible machinery operational with improvised parts and sheer stubbornness. He was deep in concentration, carefully welding a stress fracture in the coupling assembly when movement outside caught his peripheral vision. Through the translucent aluminum windows of his workshop, something large was moving against the storm. Marcus paused his work and squinted through the swirling snow. At first he thought it might be another lost survey drone, blown off course by the wind. The company had lost dozens of them to the storms over the past year. But as the shape drew closer, Marcus realized it was moving with purpose, fighting against the wind rather than being carried by it. The creature that emerged from the white hell outside his garage was unlike anything in the colonial databases. It stood nearly as tall as Marcus himself, with thick silver-gray fur that seemed to shimmer with its own internal light. Its body was lean but powerful, built for endurance rather than speed. Most striking were its eyes, deep amber orbs that held an intelligence Marcus had never seen in any of the local fauna. But it wasn't alone. Clutched carefully in its massive jaws was something that made Marcus's heart skip. A smaller version of itself, completely motionless, covered in what looked like frost. The creature's movements were careful, deliberate, like a parent carrying a sleeping child. Marcus slowly set down his plasma torch and approached the reinforced glass. The creature outside seemed to notice him immediately. Those amber eyes locked onto his, and Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperature. There was desperation in that gaze, a plea that transcended species. The creature took another step closer to the garage doors, then gently set down its burden. Marcus could see now that it was carrying what appeared to be a juvenile of its species, completely still and covered in ice crystals. But the adult wasn't done. It moved away from the first small form and returned moments later with another, equally motionless. Then another. By the time the creature had finished, there were 4 small forms arranged carefully in front of Marcus's garage doors. The adult stood over them protectively, but its attention remained fixed on Marcus through the window. It was waiting for something. Marcus had been trained in xenobiology during his corporate days, before his conscience got him exiled to this frozen rock. Protocol dictated that any contact with potentially intelligent alien species required immediate notification of the colonial authority. But the nearest authority representative was 6 months away by the fastest available transport. More importantly, Marcus recognized the universal language of a parent in crisis. The creature outside wasn't a threat. It was asking for help. He moved to the garage door controls, hesitating only briefly before activating the opening sequence. The massive doors groaned as they slid apart, letting in a blast of frigid air that made his breath form instant clouds. The creature didn't move aggressively. Instead, it stepped back slightly, giving Marcus space while keeping its young ones between them. Up close, the alien was even more impressive. Its fur was actually a complex double coat designed for extreme cold survival, and Marcus could see the intelligence in its posture and movements. This was no simple animal. The way it had arranged its offspring, the deliberate eye contact, the careful approach to his garage, everything suggested a sapient being making a calculated decision. Marcus knelt down near the closest of the small forms. The juvenile was clearly in some kind of hibernation or suspended animation, but ice had formed across its fur and breathing passages. Without intervention, it wouldn't survive much longer. The others were in similar condition. The adult creature made a low sound, not quite a growl but not quite a whine. It was communication, Marcus realized. The creature was trying to tell him something about its young. I understand, Marcus said softly, not sure if the creature could comprehend his words, but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. You brought them here for help. He stood slowly and moved back toward his workbench. The alien watched his every movement but didn't follow. Instead, it settled down near its offspring, never taking its eyes off Marcus. Marcus grabbed his emergency medical kit and his portable heating unit. He'd never treated alien physiology before, but the basics of hypothermia were probably universal. Warmth, careful rewarming to avoid tissue damage, and clearing any obstruction from breathing passages. As he worked, kneeling beside the first juvenile with the adult creature watching intently, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at the situation. Here he was, a disgraced corporate engineer on a forgotten ice world, apparently performing emergency veterinary medicine on an alien species that had somehow recognized him as someone who might help. The first juvenile's breathing passages were clogged with ice. Marcus carefully used a heated probe to melt the blockage, working slowly to avoid causing damage. The moment the ice cleared, the small creature drew a shuddering breath. Its eyes fluttered open, revealing the same amber intelligence as its parent. The adult creature made another sound, this one clearly expressing relief and gratitude. It moved closer, still careful not to crowd Marcus, but near enough to nuzzle its awakening offspring gently. Marcus smiled despite the bitter cold. 1 down, 3 to go, he murmured, moving to the next juvenile. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside his garage, something unprecedented was happening. A human and an alien were working together to save lives with no protocol to guide them, except the most basic instinct of all sentient beings, the drive to help those in need. 3 hours later, Marcus sat back on his heels, exhausted but satisfied. All 4 juveniles were breathing normally, their body temperatures gradually returning to safe levels under the warming lamps he'd rigged around them. The adult creature, which Marcus had begun thinking of as the mother, hadn't left their side except to occasionally pace to the garage opening and peer out into the storm. The juveniles were remarkable. As they warmed and became more alert, Marcus could see the same intelligence that marked their parent reflected in their smaller amber eyes. They stayed close together, occasionally making soft chirping sounds that the mother answered with gentle rumbles. It was clearly a complex communication system. Marcus had never seen anything like them in the colonial databases, which meant they were either an undiscovered species or they'd migrated to this region recently. Given the advanced intelligence he was witnessing, the latter seemed more likely. These creatures had to have come from somewhere with a more developed ecosystem. The mother had been watching Marcus's every movement throughout the treatment process, and he'd begun to notice patterns in her behavior. When he moved too quickly, she would tense slightly. When he spoke in softer tones, she seemed to relax. Most remarkably, she appeared to be learning from observing his techniques. When Marcus went to adjust the warming lamp over the smallest juvenile, the mother gently nudged the young one closer to the heat source herself. She was adapting to the situation, understanding that the artificial warmth was helping her offspring recover. "You're smart," Marcus said aloud, settling into a crouch a few feet away from the family group, "smarter than anything we've encountered on this planet." Which raises the question of where you came from. The mother's head tilted at his words, and Marcus had the distinct impression she was trying to understand his verbal communication just as intently as he was trying to understand hers. Her response was a series of low, modulated sounds that carried remarkable emotional nuance. Marcus pulled out his personal data pad and began recording. If these beings were as intelligent as they appeared, this first contact situation was far beyond his expertise or authority. But until he could reach someone qualified to handle it properly, he had a responsibility to document everything. The mother seemed to recognize the device as some kind of tool. Her attention focused on it with obvious curiosity. Marcus held it where she could see the screen, showing her the waveform patterns her vocalizations were creating. Her reaction was immediate and startling. She moved closer, studying the visual representation of her own sounds. Then deliberately she made another series of calls while watching the screen. She was experimenting, testing the relationship between her vocalizations and the visual patterns. Incredible. Marcus breathed, adjusting the recording settings to capture more detailed frequency analysis. You understand cause and effect? You're actively trying to figure out how the technology works. The largest of the juveniles had recovered enough to sit up, though it still leaned heavily against its siblings for warmth. It noticed its mother's interest in Marcus's datapad and chirped inquisitively. The mother responded with what Marcus was beginning to recognize as explanatory sounds, apparently describing what she was observing. Teaching behavior. The mother was actually explaining the situation to her offspring. Marcus felt a chill of excitement that had nothing to do with the cold air still seeping through his garage doors. He was witnessing not just intelligence but culture transmission. These beings had language, learning behaviors, and social structures sophisticated enough for real-time education. The smallest juvenile, still weak from its ordeal, made a distressed sound. Immediately, both the mother and the other juveniles oriented toward it with obvious concern. The mother began a low, rhythmic vocalization that seemed to calm the young one, while the siblings moved closer to share their body heat. Marcus recognized compassionate behavior when he saw it. These weren't just intelligent beings. They were empathetic ones. The realization hit him with surprising force. He wasn't just providing medical aid to unknown creatures. He was helping a family. The mother must have noticed his emotional response because she made a different sound, softer and more melodic than her previous communications. It carried an unmistakable tone of gratitude. She understood that he had helped her children and she was thanking him. "You're welcome," Marcus replied, knowing she wouldn't understand his words but hoping his tone conveyed his meaning. "I couldn't just watch them suffer." The exchange seemed to mark a turning point in their interaction. The mother rose and moved closer to Marcus, no longer maintaining the careful distance she'd preserved since entering his garage. She stopped just within arm's reach and made another series of sounds, these clearly directed at him personally. Marcus remained still, recognizing this as a significant moment. The creature was making a choice to trust him more completely. After a moment, she extended her head toward him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. Slowly, carefully, Marcus extended his own hand. The mother sniffed delicately at his fingers, then, to his amazement, gently touched her nose to his palm. It was unmistakably a gesture of acceptance and trust. The juveniles watched this interaction with obvious interest. The largest one made a questioning sound toward its mother, who responded with what Marcus was learning to recognize as an affirmative tone. Permission granted, the young one approached Marcus as well, though with considerably more caution than its parent. Marcus remained motionless as the juvenile sniffed at his other hand, then mimicked its mother's gesture of trust. Soon all 4 young ones had approached him, each accepting him as a safe presence in their immediate environment. "Well," Marcus said quietly, "this is definitely going in my report to the Colonial Authority, assuming they believe any of it." The mother made a sound that impossibly seemed almost like laughter. Her head tilted in that listening posture again, and Marcus wondered if she was beginning to associate certain patterns in his speech with emotional states. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside. The howling wind had dropped to a steady whisper, and the visibility beyond his garage doors was slowly improving. Marcus realized that the mother had probably been monitoring the weather conditions just as much as her offspring's recovery. As if responding to his thoughts, the mother moved to the garage opening and looked out into the gradually clearing landscape. She made a long, complex vocalization that carried across the frozen terrain. Marcus wondered if she was calling to others of her kind, letting them know the family had found shelter. The response came from multiple directions. Distant calls echoed across the ice, too far away for Marcus to see their sources, but close enough to make it clear that this family wasn't alone. There were others out there, and they were answering. The mother returned to her offspring, nuzzling each one carefully. They were strong enough now to stand and move around, though they still stayed close together. Marcus realized that his impromptu medical intervention was coming to an end. The family would soon be ready to rejoin their people. But something had changed in these few hours. A bridge had been built between human and alien, based on nothing more complex than one being recognizing another's need and choosing to help. As Marcus watched the family prepare for their departure, he wondered if this moment might be remembered as something more significant than a simple rescue operation. He was about to find out just how significant it would become. Marcus woke the next morning to the sound of his proximity alarms. Something large was moving around outside his garage, triggering the motion sensors he'd installed to warn of approaching storms or equipment failures. He rolled out of his thermal sleeping bag and grabbed his sidearm. Though he suspected he already knew what he'd find, the family had returned, but they hadn't come alone. Through his workshop windows, Marcus counted at least a dozen adult creatures similar to the mother, along with several more juveniles. They moved with the coordinated precision of a pack, but there was nothing threatening in their positioning. Instead, they seemed to be arranging themselves in some kind of ceremonial formation around his garage entrance. The mother from the previous day stood at the front of the group, her 4 offspring beside her. When she spotted Marcus through the window, she made a distinctive call that seemed to signal the others. As one, the entire group settled onto their haunches in what could only be described as a respectful waiting posture. Marcus holstered his weapon and activated the garage door controls. As the massive doors slid open, he was struck again by the intelligence evident in these beings. None of them moved forward aggressively. They simply waited, watching him with those remarkable amber eyes. The mother approached slowly, carrying something in her jaws. She stopped a few feet from Marcus and gently placed her burden on the ground between them. It was a piece of metal, but unlike anything Marcus had seen before. The surface was smooth and lustrous, with a deep blue-black coloration that seemed to shift and flow as he looked at it. More striking was its shape. The metal had been carefully worked into a complex geometric pattern that was both beautiful and functional. Marcus recognized stress distribution principles in the design, engineering concepts that shouldn't have been possible without advanced metallurgy and mathematical understanding. "This is a gift," Marcus said, understanding the significance of the gesture, even if he couldn't comprehend the technology behind it. "Thank you." The mother's response was a pleased rumble. But she wasn't finished. She made another series of calls, and several other adults approached, each carrying their own offering. Marcus found himself the recipient of more worked metal pieces, some kind of crystalline substance that gave off its own soft light, and what appeared to be a complex tool whose purpose he couldn't immediately identify. It was clear that news of his help had spread through their community, and they had come to express their gratitude. But as Marcus examined the gifts more closely, he began to realize their true significance. These weren't just thank you presents. They were examples of advanced technology. The metal pieces showed manufacturing precision beyond current human capabilities. The crystalline objects appeared to be some kind of energy storage or conversion system, and the tool, as Marcus studied its elegant design, seemed to be a multi-purpose device incorporating principles he didn't recognize. "You're not just intelligent," Marcus murmured, running his fingers over the impossibly smooth surface of one metal piece. "You're technologically advanced. More advanced than we are." The implications hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't dealing with a primitive alien species that had somehow evolved intelligence. These beings had a sophisticated civilization, probably somewhere else on the planet, and he'd just made first contact. The mother seemed to recognize his growing understanding. She approached closer and made a series of complex vocalizations while gesturing toward the gifts, then toward Marcus himself, then toward his workshop and the equipment visible within it. Marcus pulled out his data pad again, this time activating its translation algorithms. The patterns were still too complex for real-time comprehension, but he was beginning to identify recurring sound clusters that might represent concepts or objects. One cluster kept appearing in association with the gifts. Another seemed connected to Marcus himself. A third appeared whenever the mother gestured toward his workshop. "Gift," Marcus said aloud, pointing to the metal pieces. "Me," he added, pointing to himself. "Workshop," he concluded, indicating his garage. The mother's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. She repeated the sounds Marcus had made, then provided what were clearly corrections to his pronunciation. She was actively trying to teach him their language. Several of the other adults moved closer, apparently intrigued by this linguistic exchange. Soon Marcus found himself in the middle of an impromptu language lesson, with multiple teachers offering variations and clarifications of basic vocabulary. The juveniles seemed to find this particularly entertaining. They made sounds that Marcus was learning to recognize as their version of laughter, clearly amused by his clumsy attempts at their sophisticated vocal patterns. But as the lesson progressed, Marcus began to pick up more complex concepts. The metal gifts weren't just tokens of appreciation. They were examples, demonstrations of what their people could create. The mother was showing him their level of technological development, probably trying to establish his species' capabilities in return. Marcus looked around his workshop, seeing it suddenly through alien eyes. His improvised repairs, jury-rigged heating systems, and cobbled-together diagnostic equipment probably looked pretty primitive compared to their elegant crystal energy devices. But then he noticed where the aliens' attention was focused. They weren't dismissing his technology as inferior. Instead, they seemed fascinated by his adaptive engineering, the way he'd modified and combined different systems to solve problems they weren't designed for. The largest of the adult aliens, nearly half again as big as the mother, approached Marcus's workbench. It made questioning sounds while examining the plasma torch Marcus had been using the previous day. Its interest seemed focused on the improvised modifications Marcus had made to increase the tool's efficiency in low-temperature conditions. You want to understand how it works, Marcus realized. You're engineers too. He activated the torch, adjusting it to a low-power setting for demonstration purposes. The alien watched intently as Marcus showed how. He'd modified the gas mixture and flow regulators to compensate for the planet's atmospheric conditions. The creature's response was a series of excited vocalizations, directed at the other adults. Soon the entire group was examining Marcus's various improvised solutions with obvious professional interest. It was a revelation. These beings weren't just intelligent, they were scientists and engineers. They understood technology, respected innovation, and recognized good problem-solving when they saw it. Marcus's exile to this frozen planet suddenly felt like something else entirely. He'd been put in exactly the right place at the right time to make first contact with a species that could appreciate human ingenuity. The mother approached him again, this time carrying one of the crystal devices. She held it out toward him in an unmistakably offering gesture, but her vocalization suggested this was different from the previous gifts. You want me to try to figure out how it works, Marcus said, accepting the crystal carefully. This is a challenge, isn't it? A test. The crystal was warm to the touch and seemed to pulse with internal light. As Marcus examined it more closely, he noticed what might be control surfaces or interface points worked into its structure. It was clearly a sophisticated piece of technology, probably far beyond his ability to understand fully. But Marcus had spent 3 years keeping impossible machinery running through sheer stubbornness and creative problem-solving. He'd learned to look at technology from unconventional angles, to find solutions that weren't in any manual. He activated his diagnostic scanner and began examining the crystal's energy patterns. The readings were unlike anything in his databases, but the underlying principles seemed familiar. Energy storage, controlled release, some kind of feedback regulation system. As Marcus worked, he became aware that his alien audience was watching with intense interest. This wasn't just casual curiosity. They were evaluating him, judging his capabilities as an engineer and scientist. No pressure at all. Marcus smiled grimly and got back to work. If these beings wanted to see what human ingenuity could accomplish, he was more than ready to show them. 6 hours into his examination of the crystal device, Marcus was ready to admit defeat. Every conventional analysis method he'd tried had yielded nothing but confusing readings. The energy patterns shifted constantly, seemingly in response to his attempts to understand them. It was like trying to solve a puzzle that changed its rules every time he thought he was making progress. But then he remembered something from his early engineering training. Sometimes the most elegant solutions came from abandoning conventional approaches entirely. Instead of trying to force the device to conform to human technological frameworks, maybe he needed to understand it on its own terms. Marcus set down his scanners and simply held the crystal, closing his eyes and focusing on what his hands could tell him. The warmth wasn't uniform. It pulsed in complex rhythms. The surface wasn't perfectly smooth. There were tiny variations in texture that his instruments had missed. Most importantly, the device seemed to respond to his touch. The pulsing patterns changed when he moved his fingers to different areas, almost like it was trying to communicate with him through tactile feedback. "You're not just a tool," Marcus said aloud, opening his eyes to find the entire alien assembly still watching him intently. "You're interactive. You're designed to work with biological neural patterns." The mother made an encouraging sound, and Marcus caught what might have been approval in the vocalizations of the other adults. He was on the right track. Marcus repositioned his hands on the crystal, this time trying to match his breathing and heart rate to the rhythm of the pulses. Almost immediately, the device's behavior changed. The internal light grew brighter, and Marcus felt a strange tingling sensation in his fingertips. Then something extraordinary happened. Images began forming in his mind, not visual exactly, but conceptual patterns that his brain interpreted as three-dimensional structures. He was seeing the internal workings of the crystal device, understanding its function through direct neural interface. It was a power source, but unlike anything humans had ever conceived. Instead of converting one form of energy into another, it somehow tapped into the fundamental quantum fluctuations of space itself. The engineering principles behind it were so advanced that Marcus could only grasp the basic concepts, but he could see how it worked. More than that, he could see how it could be modified, improved, adapted for different purposes. The device was apparently designed as a teaching tool, allowing users to explore technological concepts through direct neural feedback. Marcus opened his eyes to find the mother had moved much closer. Her amber gaze was fixed on his face with an intensity that suggested she was monitoring his progress closely. When their eyes met, she made a sound that Marcus now recognized as a question. "I can see it," Marcus said softly. "I can see how it works. It's incredible." The mother's response was a complex series of vocalizations that seemed to convey satisfaction and excitement. She called to the other adults, several of whom approached with their own crystal devices. Marcus found himself the center of an impromptu technology demonstration. Each crystal operated on the same basic principles but served different functions: power generation, information storage, environmental modification, even what appeared to be some kind of communication system. The aliens were showing him the breadth of their technological capabilities, but more than that, they were inviting him to participate. As Marcus learned to interface with each device, the aliens began incorporating his modifications and suggestions into their demonstrations. They weren't just showing off their technology, they were collaborating with him to explore new possibilities. It was the most exhilarating experience of Marcus's scientific career. He was working with minds that approached problems from completely different angles, using principles that challenged every assumption he'd made about physics and engineering. The largest adult, the one who'd first examined Marcus's plasma torch, brought forward what was clearly their most sophisticated device. It was larger than the others, with a crystalline structure so complex that Marcus couldn't identify where one component ended and another began. This one required the interface techniques of all the smaller devices combined. As Marcus established the neural connection, he realized he was looking at something unprecedented, a complete technological framework for manipulating matter at the molecular level. Nanotechnology, Marcus breathed, but not like anything we've imagined. This is controlled molecular engineering using quantum field manipulation. The implications staggered him. With this technology, virtually any material could be synthesized, any structure could be built, any environmental challenge could be overcome. It was the key to true post-scarcity civilization, and these beings were sharing it with him. Marcus looked up from the device to find every alien in the group watching him with obvious anticipation. The mother stepped forward and made a series of vocalizations that carried unmistakable significance. She was asking him something important. Then Marcus understood. They weren't just demonstrating their technology for his education. They were making an offer. "You want to work together," Marcus said, the realization hitting him like a revelation. "You're inviting humanity to join some kind of technological exchange." The mother's affirmative response was enthusiastic, echoed by sounds of agreement from the other adults. But there was more to it than that. As Marcus continued to interface with their devices, he began to understand the scope of what they were proposing. These beings weren't just from Kepler 442b. They were part of a larger confederation, a network of intelligent species that shared knowledge and resources across multiple star systems. Their technology was so advanced because it represented the combined scientific achievements of dozens of civilizations, and they were inviting humanity to join them. But there was a condition, one that Marcus could sense through the neural interface even though it wasn't explicitly stated. Membership in this confederation required more than just technological capability. It required wisdom, restraint, and a commitment to using advanced technology for the benefit of all sentient life. Marcus thought about the corporate mining operations that had brought him to this planet, the way they exploited resources without regard for environmental impact or the rights of indigenous species. He thought about the political conflicts that still raged across human space, the weapons development programs, the casual disregard for anything that couldn't be immediately monetized. Humanity might not be ready for this opportunity. But then Marcus looked around his improvised workshop, at the evidence of human ingenuity and adaptability that had impressed these advanced beings. He thought about the countless scientists, engineers, and dreamers who shared his passion for discovery and understanding. Maybe humanity wasn't ready yet, but maybe with the right guidance and the right examples, they could become ready. The mother approached him again, this time carrying something different. It was smaller than the other devices, simpler in design, but Marcus could sense its significance immediately. This wasn't a demonstration tool or a technological sample. It was a communicator, a way to maintain contact across interstellar distances. You want me to be a liaison, Marcus realized, to help prepare humanity for eventual contact. The mother's affirmative response carried layers of meaning that Marcus was only beginning to understand. This wasn't just about technology transfer. It was about cultural exchange, about gradually introducing humanity to the larger galactic community. And it was about testing whether humans could truly be trusted with the power that advanced technology represented. Marcus accepted the communicator, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with it. Everything was about to change, not just for him, but potentially for all of humanity. The question was whether his species was wise enough to handle that change responsibly. 3 weeks after first contact, Marcus's isolated workshop had become something entirely different. The alien confederation, which called itself the Harmony of Worlds, had established a temporary research station nearby. The graceful crystalline structures that emerged from the permafrost looked like art installations, but Marcus knew they housed technology that could revolutionize human civilization. The beings he'd first helped, who called themselves the Cathara, had become his primary contacts and teachers. Their leader, the mother who'd first brought her offspring to him, had a name that translated roughly as swift thought over ice. She'd become Marcus's guide to the complexities of galactic civilization, but the real test was just beginning. Your species faces a choice, Swift thought explained through the neural interface that had become second nature to Marcus. We have monitored human development for several of your generations. You show great promise but also great danger. Marcus was reviewing data streams from across human space, information the Harmony had been collecting as they observed humanity's expansion. The picture was sobering. Military conflicts, environmental destruction, corporate exploitation of indigenous populations on dozens of worlds, but also incredible achievements in science, art, and exploration. We're not ready, Marcus admitted. Some of us are, maybe many of us. But as a species, we're still too divided, too focused on short-term gains. That is why the test is necessary, another Cathara added. This one was called Deep Current Beneath, and served as something like a philosopher-scientist for their group. We do not expect perfection, but we must see evidence of growth potential. The test, as Marcus had come to understand it, was elegantly simple in concept and terrifyingly complex in execution. The Harmony would provide humanity with a single piece of their technology, something significant enough to transform civilization if used wisely, but dangerous enough to cause catastrophic damage if misused. Humanity's response to this gift would determine whether they were ready for full contact and membership in the galactic community. Marcus had been chosen to select the technology and oversee the initial introduction. It was a responsibility that kept him awake at night, staring at the aurora displays that danced across Kepler 442b's sky. The energy matrix technology, Marcus said finally, making his decision. It's clean, virtually limitless power, but it requires cooperation to implement on a planetary scale. It can't be weaponized easily, but it could eliminate resource scarcity if humanity learns to work together to deploy it. Swift Thought's approval resonated through the neural link. A wise choice. It offers great benefit but requires wisdom to use properly. It will test both your species' technical capabilities and social maturity. The plan they developed was careful and gradual. Marcus would discover the technology through his legitimate research, making it appear to be a breakthrough in his analysis of local mineral formations. The explanation would be technically accurate, just incomplete. Humanity would believe they'd found the secret to clean energy in the unique geological structures of Kepler 442b. What they wouldn't realize was that the real breakthrough required understanding principles that the Cathera had spent millennia developing, principles that would force human scientists to work together across national and corporate boundaries to fully implement. The first phase began when Marcus transmitted his discovery to the Colonial Research Authority. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, every major corporation, government, and research institution in human space was demanding access to his data. Marcus watched the human response with growing concern. Instead of the collaborative excitement he'd hoped for, the initial reaction was competitive and territorial. 3 different mining consortiums claimed exclusive rights to his research. 2 governments declared Kepler 442b a strategic resource requiring military protection. The corporate board that had exiled him suddenly wanted to offer him unlimited funding for further research. They're going to fight over it, Marcus told Swift Thought during one of their daily conferences. Instead of working together, they're already drawing battle lines. This is expected, Deep Current Beneath replied through the link. All species show this response initially. The test is not whether humans avoid the trap, but whether they learn to escape it. Marcus wasn't sure that distinction mattered if humanity destroyed itself, fighting over the technology before they could learn to use it properly. But the Harmony had been through this process with dozens of species over thousands of years. They understood something about the dynamics of civilizational development that Marcus was only beginning to grasp. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Sarah Chen, Marcus's younger sister and a physicist at the Luna Research Institute, was part of the second wave of scientists analyzing his data. Unlike the corporate teams that were trying to reverse engineer the technology for immediate exploitation, Sarah was focusing on understanding the underlying principles. Her messages to Marcus were excited but confused. "The mathematics don't work," she wrote. "The energy outputs you're showing require quantum field manipulation on scales we can't achieve. It's like you've found a way to violate conservation of energy." Marcus smiled as he crafted his response. Sarah was asking the right questions, the ones that would eventually lead humanity to understand that this technology required fundamental advances in cooperation and understanding. "The key is in the crystalline matrix structures," he replied, "but they don't work in isolation. You need networked arrays synchronized across multiple locations. No single facility can generate the field coherence necessary for stable energy production." That was the crucial element the Cathera had built into the technology. It couldn't be monopolized because it required cooperation on a massive scale, but it also couldn't be weaponized easily because the destruction of any major component would cause the entire network to shut down safely. Sarah's response came back within hours, and Marcus could feel her excitement through the text. "You're talking about a global energy grid that requires unprecedented international cooperation. The technical challenges alone would force us to share resources and knowledge in ways we've never attempted." "Exactly," Marcus wrote back. "And if we can't learn to work together on this, maybe we don't deserve to have it." The message went further than Marcus had intended, revealing more of his true feelings about humanity's readiness for advanced technology. But Sarah's response surprised him. "You sound like you're talking about more than just an energy source, Marcus. What aren't you telling me?" Marcus stared at the message for a long time before responding. His sister was brilliant, intuitive, and had always been able to read between the lines of his communications. If anyone could understand the real situation, it would be Sarah. But telling her would mean expanding the circle of knowledge about the Harmony, and that decision wasn't his to make alone. "I think," Marcus wrote carefully, "that this discovery is going to change more than just how we power our civilization. I think it's going to change who we are as a species." Swift Thought had been monitoring the exchange, a fact that would have disturbed Marcus early in their relationship, but which he now accepted as natural. The Cathera leader's response came through the neural link immediately. "Your sister asks good questions. Perhaps it is time to consider expanding the contact circle. Marcus felt a chill of both excitement and terror. The test was entering a new phase, one that would determine not just humanity's technological future, but their place in the larger galactic community. And it was about to become much more complicated. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived on Kepler 442b 3 months after Marcus's initial transmission, leading a joint research team that represented the first successful international cooperation in response to his discovery. The team included scientists from the European Federation, the Asian Alliance, the African Union, and even representatives from the traditionally isolationist Mars colonies. It was exactly the kind of response the Harmony had hoped to. Marcus met his sister's transport at the expanded landing facility that had sprung up near his workshop. The once desolate ice world now bustled with prefabricated research stations, communication arrays, and the infrastructure needed to support serious scientific investigation. "You look different," Sarah said as she embraced her brother, calmer somehow. "Like you found something you were looking for." Marcus smiled, knowing she had no idea how accurate that observation was. "I've had time to think out here, to gain some perspective on what's really important." Sarah's team was impressive, representing some of the finest scientific minds humanity had to produce. But as Marcus watched them set up their equipment and begin their analysis, he found himself seeing them through Cathara eyes. They were brilliant, dedicated, and passionate about their work. But they were also competitive, territorial about their research, and quick to dismiss ideas that didn't fit their preconceptions. Very human. In other words, the breakthrough came when Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Luna Institute made the same connection that had led Marcus to understand the technology's true nature. The energy matrices weren't just scientifically interesting. They were pedagogical tools designed to teach cooperative principles through practical application. "This is incredible," Tanaka announced during the team's weekly conference. "The more I study these structures, the more I'm convinced they're not natural formations. The mathematical precision, the integrated design principles, the way they seem optimized for specific technological applications. This is evidence of intelligence." The room fell silent. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as he realized the moment he'd been dreading and anticipating had finally arrived. "What kind of intelligence?" Sarah asked quietly. Tanaka pulled up his analysis on the main display. "Non-human. The design philosophy is completely unlike anything in our technological traditions, but it's clearly the product of advanced engineering. These formations show signs of being deliberately placed and configured." Dr. Elena Vasquez from the European Federation leaned forward in her chair. "You're suggesting alien technology?" "I'm suggesting," Tanaka said carefully, "that we need to consider the possibility that we're not alone on this planet." Marcus felt Swift-Thought's presence in his mind through the neural link, a sensation that had become as familiar as his own thoughts. The Cathara leader was monitoring the conversation and waiting for Marcus to make his choice. "There's something I need to show you," Marcus said, standing up from the conference table. "Something I should have shared earlier, but I needed to be sure you were ready to understand it." He led the team outside, toward the section of the research complex where the Cathara had established their temporary station. The crystalline structures were beautiful in the afternoon light, casting rainbow patterns across the ice that caught everyone's attention immediately. "Those weren't there when we arrived," Dr. Vasquez said suspiciously. "Our satellite surveys showed empty terrain in this sector. They appeared 3 weeks ago," Marcus replied, "along with their builders." As if summoned by his words, Swift-Thought emerged from the largest crystalline structure. Even though Marcus had been working with the Cathara for months, the sight of her still took his breath away. She moved with fluid grace across the ice, her silver fur shimmering in the light, her amber eyes fixed on the human research team. The reaction was immediate and varied. 2 of the scientists reached for emergency communicators. Dr. Tanaka stood frozen, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Sarah, to Marcus's surprise, stepped forward rather than back. "She's beautiful," Sarah said softly, "and clearly intelligent. Look at the way she's observing us, analyzing our reactions." Swift-Thought stopped a few meters from the group and made a series of complex vocalizations. The sounds carried emotional nuance that transcended species barriers, conveying peaceful intentions and cautious curiosity. "She's trying to communicate," Sarah realized. "Marcus, how long have you been in contact with them?" Since the day they brought their injured offspring to my workshop for help, Marcus replied. They've been teaching me about their technology, their civilization, their place in a larger galactic community. The implications of that statement hit the research team like a physical blow. Dr. Vasquez was the first to find her voice. Galactic community? You're talking about multiple species? Marcus nodded, then activated the neural interface device Swift Thought had given him. The crystalline communicator came to life, projecting a three-dimensional map of the local stellar region. Hundreds of star systems were marked with symbols indicating inhabited worlds and the species that called them home. The Harmony of Worlds, Marcus explained, a confederation of intelligent species that spans thousands of light years. They've been monitoring humanity for generations, waiting for us to develop enough to make contact. Dr. Tanaka's scientific excitement overcame his shock. The energy matrix technology. It's theirs, isn't it? They've been testing us. Testing whether we're ready to join them, Marcus confirmed. Whether we can move beyond competition and conflict to cooperation and wisdom. Swift Thought approached closer. Her attention focused on Sarah. She made a questioning vocalization, and Marcus realized she was asking permission to attempt direct communication. She wants to establish a neural link with you, Sarah. It's how they share complex information directly from mind to mind. It doesn't hurt, but it's intense. Sarah looked at her brother, then at the magnificent alien being waiting patiently for her decision. Will I be able to understand their language? Their technology? You'll be able to understand much more than that, Marcus replied. You'll see humanity through their eyes. You'll understand what we need to become to earn a place in the galactic community. Sarah extended her hand toward Swift Thought, who gently placed a crystalline device in her palm. The moment Sarah's fingers made contact, her eyes widened as the neural interface activated. Marcus watched his sister's face as she experienced the same revelation he'd gone through months earlier. The vast scope of galactic civilization, the incredible diversity of intelligent species, the accumulated wisdom of millions of years of cooperation and growth. But most importantly, she saw humanity's potential, not as conquerors or competitors, but as contributors to something larger than themselves. When the link ended, Sarah was crying. We're so small, she whispered. But we're not alone. We've never been alone. The other scientists gathered around as Sarah shared what she'd experienced, their fear giving way to wonder and excitement. Marcus realized they were witnessing a pivotal moment in human history. The test was far from over, but humanity had just taken its first real step toward joining the galactic community. Swift Thought made another series of vocalizations, these clearly directed at the entire group. Marcus translated automatically, the neural link having given him fluency in the Cathara language. She says the real work begins now. They're willing to share their knowledge with us, but only if we prove we can use it responsibly. The energy technology is just the beginning. What comes next will determine the future of both our species. As the human research team began to grasp the true scope of what was being offered, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. His exile to this frozen world had led to the most important moment in human history, but he also felt the weight of responsibility. The choices humanity made in the coming months would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. 2 years after first contact, Marcus stood before the United Earth Assembly, looking out at representatives from every nation, corporation, and colony in human space. The great hall buzzed with nervous energy as delegates prepared to vote on the most important decision in human history. The Harmony Accords lay before them, a comprehensive agreement that would formally establish humanity's relationship with the Galactic Confederation. But the path to this moment had been anything but smooth. The initial reaction to the revelation of alien contact had been predictably chaotic. 3 governments had immediately classified the information and attempted to claim exclusive control over the alien technology. 2 major corporations had launched private military expeditions to Kepler 442b, trying to secure their own access to Cathara knowledge. The Mars colonies had threatened to secede from the Earth Alliance rather than submit to alien manipulation. It had taken months of careful diplomacy, both human and Cathara, to prevent the discovery from tearing human civilization apart. The turning point had come when Swift Thought and her delegation visited Earth directly, appearing before the full assembly to speak for themselves. The sight of obviously intelligent, peaceful beings offering to share. Knowledge and wisdom had shifted public opinion dramatically. But the real breakthrough had been the demonstration of the energy matrix technology working on a planetary scale. The Cathera had helped humanity construct a prototype power grid linking facilities on Earth, Luna, and Mars. The resulting clean energy production had been staggering, providing more power than humanity had ever dreamed possible, while producing zero waste or environmental damage. More importantly, the project had required unprecedented cooperation between former rivals. The technology simply couldn't function without genuine collaboration and shared oversight. "The question before us today," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the assembly hall, "is not whether we're ready for this opportunity. The question is whether we're brave enough to become ready." He activated the holographic display behind him, showing the galactic map Swift thought had first shared with Sarah's research team. Hundreds of civilizations, thousands of inhabited worlds, millions of years of accumulated knowledge and wisdom. "The harmony of worlds doesn't expect us to be perfect," Marcus continued. "They expect us to grow. They expect us to learn from our mistakes and commit to being better than we were yesterday." Ambassador Chen, Sarah's new role as Earth's primary liaison to the Harmony, stood to address the assembly. "The Accords represent more than just a treaty. They're a promise, a commitment to using advanced technology for the benefit of all sentient life, not just human advancement." The debate that followed was intense but respectful. The old patterns of nationalistic posturing and corporate maneuvering had been largely abandoned in favor of genuine discussion about humanity's future. The opposition came primarily from those who feared losing human independence and autonomy. Senator Williams from the North American Federation voiced the concerns of many when he asked, "How do we know this isn't just a more sophisticated form of colonization? How do we know these aliens won't eventually demand submission in exchange for their technology?" Swift thought herself answered, rising from her place in the observation gallery. The neural translation system, now standard equipment throughout the assembly hall, carried her words to every delegate. "Your fears are understandable," she said, her voice carrying the wisdom of centuries. "We have seen them in every species we have contacted. The answer is not in our words, but in your choices. We offer knowledge, not control. We share wisdom, not commands. What you do with what we offer will always be your decision alone." She paused, her amber gaze taking in the entire assembly. "But understand this. The galaxy is vast and full of wonders and dangers you cannot yet imagine. The knowledge we offer is not just about energy production or technological advancement. It is about survival, about becoming wise enough to thrive among the stars without losing what makes you uniquely human." The vote, when it finally came, was closer than Marcus had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. The Harmony Accords passed by a margin of 68%, establishing humanity as a provisional member of the Galactic Confederation. The celebrations that followed were unlike anything in human history. For the first time since the species had left Earth, humanity was truly united in a common purpose. The dream of joining a vast galactic community had captured imaginations across all human worlds, but Marcus knew the real work was just beginning. As he stood in his new office at the Galactic Liaison Institute on Luna, watching Earth turn slowly beyond the observation windows, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from a disgraced corporate engineer exiled to an ice world, to humanity's first contact specialist and primary advocate for galactic integration. Swift thought entered the office, moving with her characteristic grace despite the lower gravity. She had been spending more time on human worlds lately, serving as both teacher and advisor as humanity began to adapt to their new reality. "You seem contemplative," she observed, settling into the specially designed chair that accommodated her unique physiology. "I'm thinking about that first night," Marcus replied, "when you brought your offspring to my workshop. Did you know then what it would lead to?" Swift Thought's response carried the harmonics that Marcus had learned indicated amusement. "We knew you were kind. We knew you were intelligent. We knew your species had potential. But the specific path that brought us here, that was shaped by choices you made, not plans we executed. And now the real test begins," Swift Thought said, her tone growing more serious. "Joining the Harmony is not an endpoint. It is a beginning. Your species will face challenges in the coming decades that will test every principle we hope you have learned." Through the office windows, Marcus could see the construction of humanity's first interstellar research vessel, a joint project incorporating both human engineering and Harmony technology. Soon, human explorers would venture beyond their home system to visit other worlds, to meet other species, to take their place as active participants in galactic civilization. "We'll make mistakes," Marcus said. "Probably spectacular ones. All species do," Swift Thought replied. "The measure of wisdom is not in avoiding all mistakes, but in learning from them and growing stronger." Marcus nodded, understanding finally why the Cathara had chosen to make first contact with a single human in an isolated workshop rather than a grand diplomatic mission to Earth. Real change didn't happen through treaties and formal agreements. It happened when individuals made choices to help others, to grow beyond their limitations, to become more than they thought possible. The future stretched out before humanity like an infinite frontier. There would be new worlds to explore, new species to meet, new challenges to overcome, but for the first time in human history, they wouldn't face those challenges alone. Marcus turned from the window to find Swift Thought watching him with those remarkable amber eyes. "Thank you," he said simply, "for trusting us, for giving us this chance." "Thank you," Swift Thought replied, "for proving that trust was warranted. Your species brings something unique to the Harmony. Your adaptability, your creativity, your stubborn refusal to accept limitations. The galaxy is richer for having you as part of it." As the first stars began to appear in Luna's dark sky, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The frozen mechanics workshop on Kepler 442b seemed like a lifetime ago, but he would never forget the moment when a desperate parent had trusted a stranger to help her offspring. That single act of compassion had changed the course of human history, and it was only the beginning.